He built the system that ran the entire building. Then they handed him a mop. And the day they fired him, the whole thing fell apart. At exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, every floor of the Nexus Innovations Tower screamed at once. All 40 of them. Elevators locked between floors. Fire alarms tore through conference rooms mid-sentence. The ventilation groaned, went silent. The way an old house goes quiet right before the power dies in a storm. Light smoke curled through the 20th floor corridor. Employees poured into stairwells, laptops under arms, coffee still in hand, voices climbing over each other. Serafina Reed stood in the war room on the 38th floor, 35 years old, sharp-boned, the kind of woman who could run a board meeting and a crisis debrief in the same hour without loosening her collar. Right now, her face had gone the color of old chalk. 12 engineers, 12 of the best the company owned. We can't find the root cause. The youngest said it first. The others nodded. No one understands the architecture deeply enough. Serafina pulled up the build logs herself. Her eyes moved line by line, fast, precise. Then they stopped. The core module, the one holding 40 floors together like a spine. The author tag read, CW. 2 letters, small and quiet. Tucked into the code the way a name gets carved into the underside of a porch railing. The kind of thing only the person who built it would ever think to look for. She traced them with one fingertip on the screen. They didn't explain themselves, they just waited. She cross-referenced the maintenance roster. 4 seconds. Connor Damon Whitaker. Night custodial services. Status. Terminated. Date. 4 days prior. She pulled his personnel file. 7 years. Perfect attendance. No complaints. No disciplinary notes. And no commendations either. Because nobody had ever thought to write one for the man pushing the mop cart at 2 a.m. She had seen him once. Maybe twice. Moving through the hallway near the copy room with the unhurried calm of a man who had made peace with being invisible. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of steady hands that belonged to someone who had once built things that mattered. She hadn't thought twice about it. Most people didn't. That, she was beginning to understand, was precisely the problem. He had been let go without a meeting, without a phone call, 12 words on a printed notice left in his locker. Position eliminated due to cost optimization. 8 blocks away, in a small apartment with a refrigerator covered in crayon drawings. A 6-year-old boy named Owen Whitaker sat cross-legged on the carpet, adding purple clouds to a picture he'd titled, in his best careful printing, Daddy the Hero. The lights flickered. The fan on the windowsill stuttered and stopped. Owen looked up. His lower lip went still. Then he grabbed his father's old tablet from the coffee table and video called the only number he knew by heart. Connor answered on the second ring. One look at his son's face, his chest tightened, like a fist closing around something fragile. Daddy. Owen's voice was barely above a whisper. The lights went out. I'm scared. Connor breathed in once, slow and even. He didn't reach for his phone to check the news. He didn't need to. He had spent 7 years watching over that system from the inside, the way a lighthouse keeper watches the water. Not because anyone asked, because he understood what darkness could cost. He already knew. A billion-dollar system was failing, and it had reached his son's front door. I'll fix it for you, buddy, he said softly, as if it were the simplest promise in the world. I'm always here. But what Serafina Reed was about to discover, buried in a 7-year-old patent record no one had thought to read, would make her question everything she thought she knew about the man they had thrown away. 72 hours earlier, the building had been quiet. That particular kind of quiet that only exists at 1:30 in the morning, when the last associates have finally gone home, and the only sound left is the hum of a floor buffer moving slow and steady down a corridor. That sound, and the soft tap of fingers on a phone screen. Connor Whitaker moved his mop cart to the side of the 22nd floor hallway, opened the remote monitoring app on his personal phone. He had built it himself 7 years ago, not for any company, not for any contract, just because systems had a way of talking to him, and he had learned to listen. The latency spike appeared at 1:47 a.m., a small thing. The kind that looks harmless, until it doesn't. He recognized it immediately, the way a woman who has baked her grandmother's apple pie for 40 years knows, before the oven timer goes off, that something isn't right with the crust. He sat on an overturned custodial bucket in the supply closet, fluorescent light buzzing above him, and spent the next 2 hours writing a full diagnostic report, exact cause, exact solution, every step laid out clearly enough that a first-year engineer could follow it without getting lost. He sent it to Derek Lang at 3:52 a.m. Subject line, flagged concern. Please review before morning. Then he put his phone away, picked up the mop, went back to work. He didn't wonder whether Derek would credit him or pass it upward or ignore it entirely. He had flagged the problem because the problem was real and someone needed to know. That, to Connor Whitaker, was the beginning and end of the matter. Derek Lang read the report at 7:15 a.m. Read the whole thing, which was more than he usually did with anything that came from below the 3rd floor. Then he deleted Connor's name, replaced it with his own, and before lunch, he had quietly transferred a portion of the client data referenced in the report to a third-party buyer, whose contact had been sitting in his private email for 8 months. The next morning, Connor found a sealed envelope in his locker, position eliminated due to cost optimization. He stood there a long moment, reading it twice, not from anger, not from panic, just stillness. The kind that settles into a person who has already survived the worst thing life can give and learned that most other losses, by comparison, are manageable. He found a small cardboard box in the supply closet. He didn't have much to put in it. One pen he liked, a spare phone charger, and a drawing Owen had tucked into his jacket pocket 6 months ago. A blue crayon building with stick figures in every window, and a tall figure at the bottom, holding a mop, wearing a star-shaped badge that read Dad. He walked through the lobby with the box under his arm, head slightly lowered. His old uniform slightly frayed at the collar and cuffs, the fabric worn soft from years of night shifts. The morning rush was in full swing. 30, maybe 40 people moving in every direction. Eyes on phones, coffee cups in hand. Nobody stopped. Nobody said a word. It was the kind of goodbye that wasn't a goodbye at all. From the 35th floor, Serafina Reed stood at the window. She had stepped away from a call for 30 seconds just to breathe. And she happened to look down. She saw him, a broad-shouldered man in a worn uniform, with the kind of unhurried posture that belongs to someone who has long stopped needing to prove anything. Walking out of a building that had no idea he existed. Something caught at the edge of her mind, like a thread snagged on a doorframe. She couldn't have said why. She let it go and went back to the phone. She would remember it later, at exactly the wrong time. But before any of that, before the alarms and the smoke and the 2 letters in the build log, there were the small things, the ones nobody filed reports about, nobody ever saw. 3 weeks before his termination, at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, Connor had been pushing his cart past the elevator bank on the 12th floor when he heard a sound. More breath than voice. He found a young woman from the accounting department, 7 months pregnant, pressed against the wall near the east elevator, face pale as newsprint. The car had jerked, the lights had flickered. She had been alone. Connor stayed with her for 22 minutes. He talked her through slow, steady breathing, voice so calm it was almost musical. He held the elevator door manually until maintenance arrived. When she tried to thank him afterward, he said, "I was just doing rounds." He meant it, the week before he was fired. A fellow janitor named Marcus had spilled coffee across the motherboard of his personal laptop, the machine his daughter used for school. Marcus stood in the break room looking like a man at a funeral. Connor spent 2 hours that night with a can of compressed air in those careful, calloused hands, pulling the machine apart, drying each component. It worked. Marcus bought him a vending machine sandwich. Connor ate it on a bucket in the supply closet at 4 a.m., told no one. What neither of them ever knew was that Connor had been doing quiet things like that for 7 years. Small repairs, a steadying hand, a warm word in a stairwell at midnight. A door held a second longer for someone struggling with too many boxes. None of it logged, none of it filed. The daily private practice of a man who had decided a long time ago that a life spent doing good in unremarkable ways was more than enough to justify itself. That was Connor Whitaker, not invisible because he was small, invisible because he chose quiet, and because, for 6 years, quiet had been enough. At home that evening, he leaned against the refrigerator, eyes on the drawings covering every inch of it. Leora's laugh used to fill that kitchen, the kind that started in her belly and ended with her wiping her eyes over something Owen had done. Good loud. Now it was just the refrigerator hum and crayons on paper. Owen ran in from the living room and wrapped both arms around his father's leg. "Daddy, did anyone say you did a good job today?" Connor tucked the termination letter further behind his back. His smile was slow, but real. "I'm okay, buddy. What matters is that you're happy and healthy." Owen nodded with great seriousness, the way 6-year-olds do when they've decided something is settled. Then he held up a new drawing, the blue crayon building again, 40 floors. But this time, the figure at the bottom wasn't holding a mop, he was wearing a cape. The caption read, in Owen's careful, oversized letters, "Daddy fixing the big building with the superpower of kindness." Meanwhile, on the 33rd floor, Derek Lang stood at the head of a conference table, hands in his pockets, wearing the particular confidence of a man who had never been caught. "I've handled everything," he said. And across the city, Serafina Reed sat alone at her desk with Connor's personnel file open on her screen. 7 years, no complaints, no commendations, just a name, a start date, and 2 quiet letters buried at the center of a system nobody fully understood. She whispered to the empty room, like a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Who is this man, really? And what she found next, buried in a 7-year-old patent record, was about to change everything she thought she knew about the building she ran. Serafina wasn't a woman who slept easily when a problem was still open. She had been that way since college, sitting up past midnight with a yellow legal pad and a cold cup of tea, unwilling to close a notebook until the last piece either fit or declared itself permanently missing. Her mother used to stand in the doorway and say, "Seta, the answers will still be there in the morning." The answers, it turned out, had been there for 7 years. She pulled patent number 11874-209 at 11:48 p.m., filed in Seattle. The name on the application matched the Social Security number in the personnel file sitting open on her second screen. Connor Damon Whitaker. She sat very still. Then she pulled the code repository logs, then the internal architecture documents, then the original system build notes, which most engineers hadn't bothered to read in 4 years, because the system worked. And nobody asks why the port swing holds weight as long as it keeps holding. It was all him, every foundational layer, every load-bearing piece of code that kept 40 floors running, traced back, line by careful line, to a night janitor who had been quietly watching over the building the entire time. She pushed back from her desk, walked to the window. Seattle at midnight was all wet light and distant traffic. She stood there thinking about a man with calloused hands and a worn uniform who had built something extraordinary, then gone back downstairs to sweep the floors he had also, in a very real sense, designed. In 10 years of running companies, she had never encountered anything like it. It made her feel something that sat uncomfortably between guilt and awe. And Serafina Reed was not accustomed to being made to feel things by personnel files. She sent an assistant to verify the address at 7 a.m. By 9, she was driving there herself. No advance call. Gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder, and the particular sick feeling that arrives when you realize you may have been standing on something extraordinary without knowing it. The apartment building was 8 blocks from the office. She knocked on 4B. A small voice on the other side said, matter-of-factly, "Daddy, somebody's at the door. She looks important." A quiet laugh, then footsteps. Connor opened the door in a gray t-shirt and a cooking apron, holding a wooden spatula. The kitchen smelled like garlic and tomato. A pot on the stove 2 minutes from boiling over, and Owen was at the table behind him, drawing a dinosaur wearing a baseball cap. Complete and focused concentration. Connor looked at her face and knew why she was there. He stepped back and let her in without a word. They sat at the kitchen table after dinner, Owen in the living room with 64 crayons and what appeared to be a very ambitious rocket ship project. Serafina wrapped both hands around a mug of coffee. Connor sat across from her, unhurried. She asked him to tell her the truth. He told it the way he did most things, quietly, without rushing toward the hard parts, or flinching when he got to them. Lior's diagnosis had come on a Thursday. Stage 3, the kind of news that rearranges a person's interior geography permanently. Nothing quite the same shape it was the morning before. The company's legal team arrived within 72 hours. A contract, work for hire. No creator credit, no future claims. In exchange, immediate help with medical costs. He had signed it Saturday morning. He remembered the pen was blue. The notary had a kind face. The waiting room smelled like coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Small details stick to the worst days of your life like burrs to a wool coat. "I'd have signed anything," he said, plainly, without bitterness. She was everything. Owen was 8 months old. Serafina's hands tightened slightly around the mug. After she passed, I thought about coming forward. He glanced toward the living room, where Owen was narrating something to himself in a very serious, low voice. But Owen needed consistency, a schedule, a father who came home at the same time every day. The night shift gave me that, and I knew the system. I could keep an eye on it from the inside. He slid his old phone across the table, an email from Derek Lang, sent 11 months ago, after Connor had filed a routine internal concern report. Derek's entire response, in full. Best not to mention this. 5 words. Serafina read them twice. Something moved behind her eyes. Not anger exactly, something older and quieter. The feeling of walking into a room and realizing, too late, that something important had happened there before you arrived. "You weren't angry," she said. "I was," he said. For about 20 minutes, then Owen wanted to show me a drawing. I looked at it and couldn't remember what I'd been angry about. Serafina looked down at the table. There was a small purple crayon mark near the corner, the trace of a 6-year-old who couldn't quite keep the color inside the lines. It reminded her, for reasons she couldn't entirely explain, of her mother's kitchen table, the old one with the chip on the edge from a cast-iron skillet that had slipped long before Serafina was born. The way some marks outlast the people who made them. She told him about the diagnostic report, the one sent at 3:07 in the morning, the night the system began failing. She told him she had read it 3 times, that it laid out the exact cause, the exact solution, in enough detail that anyone could follow it. That at the bottom, where most people would have typed their name in bold and CC'd every senior manager they knew, there was nothing. Just the work. And one plain sentence, not for the board, just because it needs to be fixed and people could get hurt. Her eyes were wet. She didn't bother hiding it. Then her phone rang. Her operations director. She answered. 3 words on the other end. The server room. What was happening inside the Nexus building at that exact moment was something neither of them had fully prepared for, and it was moving fast, toward the one person Connor loved most in the world. The fire had started in the server room on the 20th floor at 9:51 p.m. Not a dramatic blaze, not at first. More like the kind of thing that starts behind a wall and makes itself known slowly. The way a problem left unaddressed always does. A thermal fault in a secondary rack, accelerating toward the main cooling grid. Connor heard it on the old transistor radio Marcus kept in the break room at the storage facility 2 blocks over, where Connor had been picking up a short contracting shift to cover the week's groceries. The emergency broadcast was clipped and fast. Electrical fire, 20th floor, Nexus Innovations Tower, all personnel evacuating. He was out the door before the announcer finished. He didn't think about the termination notice. He thought about one thing only. And that thing had a round face and purple crayon on his fingers and was currently at Sunshine Steps Daycare, the center that ran on the same building management platform as Nexus, because it leased a server partition from them at reduced cost. A quiet budget decision made 18 months ago that nobody had flagged. Connor knew that detail because he had designed the system. He had never imagined it might one day reach into his son's classroom. He ran. The building's main entrance was sealed. A young guard with a flashlight waving people back toward the sidewalk. Connor went around, through the service entrance on the north side, down the basement stairwell. Moving the way you move, through a place you know, in the dark. Not by thinking, just by going. The smoke in the basement was low and acrid. The suppression system was misfiring, releasing in the wrong sequence, compounding the problem rather than containing it. Connor found the manual control panel behind a steel cabinet, half hidden by a shelving unit installed after the original system design. He had noted it as a structural oversight 7 years ago in a memo that was never acted on. He moved the shelf, opened the panel. His hands knew exactly what to do. He shut down the misfiring sequence, initiated the correct one, isolated the thermal fault, protected the cooling grid, sealed the 20th floor corridor from further spread. 6 minutes. His large hands were shaking slightly when it was done. Not from fear, from the hollow stillness that follows total focus. He wiped his palms on his jeans and turned back toward the stairwell. He heard her before he saw her. "Hello? Is someone there? The door is jammed and the air is..." "Hello? Elevator car 3, stopped between the basement and the first floor. Doors partially open. Trapped by the electrical fault." Serafina Reed was inside, back pressed against the far wall, jacket off, breathing in shallow, measured intervals. Her phone screen was dark, battery gone. She had been in there for 11 minutes and had spent every one of them the way her mother had taught her to handle enclosed spaces. One breath at a time, eyes on a fixed point, no wasted movement. Connor got both hands into the gap of the doors and pulled. They gave. She stepped forward fast, one hand catching the doorframe, and then she was in the corridor, breathing real air. Legs less steady than she would have preferred. Connor steadied her. His left palm was bleeding, a clean gash from the door's edge cutting across the calloused skin of a man who had spent years working with his hands. Long before custodial work, long before the mop cart. She grabbed his hand, looked at it, looked at him. "Why would you come back here?" Her voice was low and unsteady in a way he had never heard from her. "After everything." He met her eyes steadily. "Because no one deserves to be left behind," he said. "That's what my wife taught me." She stared at him, eyes red at the edges, one thin line of mascara down her cheek. She didn't seem to notice. Then her legs simply finished asking permission, and she sat down. Right there, on the concrete floor of the basement corridor, back against the wall. Connor sat down beside her, in that strange, amber-lit quiet. Smoke still faint in the air, emergency lights casting long shadows. She looked at his wrapped hand and said quietly, "Before all of this, what were you? Before the building?" He thought about the question for a moment. "Military engineer," he said. "Smart systems, infrastructure design. I left when Leora was diagnosed. It wasn't a difficult decision. She needed me present, and Owen was coming. The work could wait." A pause. Then she was gone, and the work didn't seem to matter the way it once had. What mattered was that Owen had a father who came home. Serafina said nothing for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and careful, the way people speak when they're handling something fragile. "My mother passed 3 years ago. I spent those 12 months flying back and forth between Seattle and Phoenix, trying to run a company and be a daughter at the same time." She stopped. "I don't think I did either one very well." "You were there," Connor said. That's what she remembered. Serafina looked at the ceiling, then back at him. Something in her face had shifted. The hard, contained precision she wore like a second skin had gone somewhere else. What was left was just a woman sitting on a concrete floor, next to a man she had badly misjudged. Thinking about her mother, They sat there a while longer, until the air was clear enough to stand, and the building above them had gone quiet in the way that follows a crisis survived. When they finally walked out, she had wrapped his cut hand with a strip of her jacket lining, roughly, efficiently, because it was what was available and it needed doing. He looked at it. You didn't have to do that. She walked ahead. I know. 2 days later, Serafina stood at the head of the boardroom table and laid out the evidence piece by piece. Patent records, code logs, the deleted report credit, the third-party data transfer. She was precise, thorough, entirely calm. The board said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Then she reached into a leather folder and held up a drawing. Owen had pressed it into her hands at the apartment door. With the gravity of a child presenting something truly important, she read it aloud, in a steady voice, to the entire company watching on screen. Thank you, Daddy the hero, and Miss Serafina too. Complete silence. The vote was 7-0. Derek Lang collected his things in a small box and walked through the lobby without a word. The people who had once applauded his quarterly reports found other places to look. He did not say goodbye. There was no one left who wanted to hear it. But the question no one in that building said out loud, not yet, was what Connor Whitaker would ask for in return. And the answer surprised every single one of them. The system came back online in 48 hours, not because of a last-minute miracle, not because of a team of engineers pulling an all-nighter on energy drinks, because someone had already written the solution at 3:07 in the morning, and all that was required was for someone to finally follow it. Every technical document was updated. Every architecture file, every patent cross-reference, every internal credit log. Connor Damon Whitaker's name appeared in all of them, in plain black text, exactly where it had always belonged. One of the younger engineers, a woman named Priya who had been with the company 8 months, stayed late 3 evenings in a row to make sure the corrections were thorough. When a colleague asked why she was bothering with the historical files, she said simply, because it's right, in a way that made clear no further explanation was needed. On Connor's first morning back, she had left something on his desk, a printed copy of patent number 11874-209, matted in a plain black frame. No note, just his name in black and white, where it had always belonged. He looked at it for a long time. Then he leaned it against the wall behind his monitor, where he could see it from his chair. Serafina brought the new contract the morning after the board meeting. Plain folder. Kitchen table in apartment 4B. Beside a half-eaten piece of toast and one of Owen's drawings. A purple elephant in a business suit. Very serious expression. The contract included full creator credit, formal recognition of the original patent, and a salary 3 times his previous rate. Connor picked it up, read it slowly, set it back down. I'll take the credit, he said, and the work. She waited. The triple salary, I don't need that. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has said something that shouldn't make sense, but somehow does. You have a son to take care of, she said. I do, and I want him to understand that his father did good work because it was right. A pause. Not because it paid more. Serafina considered this. She had spent 15 years in rooms where every number was a negotiation, where value was always measured in extraction. This was not that. This was something older and quieter. The kind of principle you only hold if you've been tested on it. And held anyway. Then take what you need, she said. Not $1 more than you're comfortable with, but let the company do right by you, Connor. Owen has earned that too. He looked toward the living room. Owen was deliberating with great seriousness between 2 shades of red crayon, as though choosing between 2 careers. He thought about the backpack with the broken zipper he'd been meaning to replace for 2 months, the winter coat getting small at the wrists, the Tuesday art class he had quietly dropped without telling anyone, because $40 a month had become $40 he needed elsewhere. He picked up the pen and signed. A week later, Serafina arrived at the small office Nexus had set up near Owen's school, a practical arrangement, because Connor had made it a condition that his hours flex around school pickup and the Tuesday art class Owen had just been re-enrolled in. She brought coffee, black, no sugar. He looked at the cup, then at her. You remembered. Pantry, 7 months ago, 6 a.m. You were the only person there, black, no sugar. She sat down across from him. It seemed like something worth knowing, he smiled. Small, quiet, and completely real. They stayed 2 hours, talking about things that had nothing to do with contracts or votes. About Owen's ongoing and passionate commitment to drawing animals in formal business attire. The elephant, a penguin in a bow tie, and what appeared to be a golden retriever holding a briefcase. He says they're the company's new executives, Connor said. He's not wrong, Serafina said. They talked about her mother's Christmas pies. Terrible every year. Baked every year anyway. Because she said the doing of it was the point. Connor said it quietly. She sounds like she was extraordinary. Serafina looked at the table. She was. I think I understand her better now than I did when she was alive. Neither of them said anything for a moment, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. The office door burst open at 3:45 p.m. Owen came through it at full speed, backpack bouncing, sneakers squeaking. He stopped just short of colliding with Serafina's chair. He studied her. One long, solemn second. The way children do when they are deciding whether a person is trustworthy. Using criteria adults have long since forgotten how to access. Then he wrapped both arms around her without a word. She froze. That first half-second of a person who has forgotten what it feels like to be held without warning. By someone who means it completely. Then she held on. Tears came. She let them. Owen pulled back, looked at her very seriously, and said, "You're kind, just like Daddy always said." She laughed. A real one. The kind that starts somewhere deep and comes out a little surprised. Connor watched the two of them. He didn't say anything, but something in his face. That particular weight he had been carrying for 6 quiet years. Shifted, lightened. Like a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. 3 months later, what had quietly grown between the three of them would find its way into the open. In the simplest, most ordinary place imaginable. 3 months later. On a Saturday afternoon in October, when the Seattle air had that particular clean sharpness that arrives like a guest who never overstays. The three of them walked together through Volunteer Park. Owen was 20 feet ahead, as usual, narrating something to himself about the flight path of a leaf he was testing against the wind. He had a red scarf tied around his shoulders like a cape. Serafina had spotted it 3 weeks ago in a shop window and brought it without much explanation, because something about it had reminded her of something she couldn't quite name, until she saw his face when he opened it. He had worn it every day since. To school, to the grocery store, once, memorably, over his pajamas. The trees along the path had gone amber and rust, and that particular deep gold that arrives every October like a quiet reassurance. That something very old and very patient is still working exactly as it should. Connor walked with his hands in his jacket pockets, unhurried. That was how he moved through the world, at its pace, not against it. Owen circled back at a run, cheeks flushed from the cold. He pressed a leaf into each of their hands with great ceremony, then turned and ran toward the pond, the red scarf flying behind him. Connor watched him go. Then he turned and looked at Serafina, directly. The way he looked at things he wanted to see clearly. 6 years is a long time to carry a life alone. 6 years of night shifts and packed lunches and school permission slips and 3 a.m. fevers and bedtime stories kept quiet so as not to wake the neighbors. 6 years of a refrigerator so covered in drawings that he had long ago stopped calling it a refrigerator and started calling it the gallery. 6 years of doing right by a small person who trusted him completely, in honor of a woman who had asked him, from a hospital bed, to stay kind. He had stayed kind, even when it cost him. Even when he walked out of a glass tower carrying a cardboard box, while 40 floors of people moved around him without a second look. And this The October light, the leaf in his hand, the boy in the red scarf, the woman standing beside him who had driven 8 blocks to knock on a door she'd never knocked on before. This was where kindness had brought him. He gently took her hand. Just that. Quiet and unhurried. The way he did everything. "He's right," Connor said. "About the drawing." Serafina looked at Owen, now in a very serious standoff with a Canada goose near the water's edge. One hand raised in what appeared to be a diplomatic gesture. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just stood with her hand in his and let herself feel the full weight of it without managing it, without bracing against it. No strategy, no next step, just this. Her mother would have liked him. She had known that for a while now. Not in the cautious, hopeful way you imagine people will like each other, but with the quiet certainty of someone who recognizes the same quality in 2 different people and understands, without needing to analyze it, what that means. Owen came running back, slightly out of breath, looking very satisfied with the outcome of the goose negotiation. He planted himself in front of both of them, reached into his jacket pocket, and produced a folded piece of paper with the careful gravity of someone presenting a legal document. He had drawn it that morning, while they were having breakfast. His tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth the way it always was when something mattered. Connor unfolded it. 3 figures. A tall man with broad shoulders, a woman in a gray coat, and a small boy in a red cape, all holding hands in a park beneath an orange tree. In Owen's careful, oversized letters across the top, "Our little family." Connor looked at it for a long time, long enough that Owen started to look mildly concerned. Then he looked up at Serafina. She was already looking at him. "He's been planning this for a while," Connor said quietly. "I know," she said. "He told me last Tuesday, showed me the draft version." Connor laughed, a real one, low and warm. The first in longer than he could precisely remember. The kind of laugh that doesn't announce itself. The kind that surprises even the person it belongs to. Owen looked very pleased. The system at Nexus Innovations ran flawlessly now. Connor's name was on every document where it had always belonged. The work was good and honest and entirely his, and the building stood because of it. But none of that was the story. Really, that was never the story. The story was a man who had been handed every reason to become hard and had simply declined. Who had sent a full solution in the middle of the night to a company that had just let him go. Not to be recognized, not to be rehired, but because the problem was real, and people could be hurt. And that was reason enough. Who had sat on a bucket in a supply closet at 4 a.m. and fixed a stranger's laptop, and never mentioned it to a soul. Who had held an elevator door for 22 minutes, and called it just doing rounds. The story was the red scarf, the purple crayon on the table, the coffee remembered from one 6-minute encounter 7 months earlier, the strip of jacket lining wrapped around a bleeding hand in an amber-lit basement. Because it was there, and it was needed. The story was the daily, private, unannounced decision to be good, not for reward, not for recognition, but because Leora had asked him to, and because Owen was watching. And because somewhere in this loud and distracted world, someone had to be the person who quietly held things together. This story teaches us something simple that we already know and keep forgetting. The people who matter most are rarely the loudest ones in the room. They're the ones who stay, fix what's broken, and never mention it. Crafted by a human, accompanied by AI, this piece hopes to leave you with one feeling, that kindness is like tiny seeds, sometimes buried under dry, cracked soil. But with just a little patience and faith, they will sprout and paint an entire sky with color.